being an effective public speaker is not contingent on you being an extrovert or overly confident. It's contingent on you being authentic and you being passionate about what you're talking about.
Meet Verity Price, a world-class speaker and innovator renowned for her captivating storytelling and creative problem-solving.
From winning the Toastmasters World Championship to transforming businesses, Verity inspires change and unlocks potential.
Only 20% of what they're going to remember of your presentation is the mechanics, the way you've written it, structured it, your slides. 30% of the impact they feel is your message. What is your why? What is your purpose? That's what they're going to repeat. That's what they're going to be talking about. 50% of what impacts an audience when you're speaking is your
Verity, what do I need to understand about your early childhood background for me to understand who you currently are?
Wow, that is a good question. So my early child background, I was born in Zimbabwe in the middle of the war and the fight for independence. And so it was quite a tough time to be living there. I was a small child. My father was in the army. And after Zimbabwe gained independence, my parents were really worried about what was going to happen with education, which is quite ironic considering Zimbabwean education is the one thing that stayed really stable for a long time. But we moved to South Africa and started over living in a caravan. My dad selling insurance door to door in his 50s, trying to make a life for us and make sure that I got a great education, and then moved to Cape Town, where again we just struggled to make ends meet. But I think it taught me a huge amount of resilience. It taught me the power of family. I've got an older brother and sister, 10 and 12 years older than me. And that shock of moving to a new country, starting over with nothing, it made us so close and so tight that it really taught us how to think out the box, how to make a lot out of a little, and it shaped me immensely. And my parents sacrificed everything to send me to a private school, a Waldorf school, so not your typical private school, a more alternative private school, but they wanted that kind of creative education for me. And that again also set the base of it's okay to think differently, it's okay to be an individual, to express yourself. But that was also where I experienced quite a bit of bullying, because a school is a school, doesn't matter what school you think you're going to. And I went from being a very confident child who wanted to be on stage and on screen, that by the time I was 14, I had just squashed those dreams down. And by 17, I was so terrified of speaking in front of people. I used to fake a temperature by putting a thermometer in a cup of tea on a Monday morning to make sure my mom wouldn't send me to school. So that was like quite a tumultuous time, close family, crazy school things that definitely set the stage of who I would later become. But at 18, if you'd asked me who was I going to be, I was going to be small. I was going to study psychology, work one-on-one with people, not take up much space. But life had different plans for me.
Mm. There's so much to unpack there, but I guess the follow-up question to that would be, some people who go through that similar childhood, similar experiences, and, some people who grow up even worse off than you guys did
Yeah.
would not make the same choices that you made and would stay stuck. What do you think happened for you that you realize that actually you don't want to stay stuck? You do want to get out. You do want to, become resourceful and think differently and make something of your life.
I think the turning point for me was at 24. I had actually started songwriting when I was 20. And it was a very unexpected thing. I just started writing lyrics and then I taught myself to write music, but I was too terrified to actually sing in front of anyone because I'd never sung before. I'd always wanted to be an actress. And so I was one of those people who sang in their bedroom and kept their dream under their pillows. And quite honestly, the fear of failure, the fear of judgment, the fear of rejection would have actually just kept me there if, when I was 24, my father hadn't died very unexpectedly. And it just woke me up. It woke me up that life is short, it's fragile, it's fleeting. And what the hell was I doing putting my dreams on hold because I was letting fear rule my life? And it was a big realization. I didn't really know what to do with it. But what I decided to do was 6 months after my father died, I decided to, there's a very famous pilgrimage in Spain, across the north of Spain, to a town called Santiago de Compostela. And I'd read a book about it going, wow, that would be amazing to walk across Spain. And the old me would have just left that as, wow, that would be amazing, and never do it. But losing my dad, I decided to start walking that 800-kilometer pilgrimage on his birthday and the 6-month anniversary of his death. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. It was a real long walk to freedom, I'll put it. But it showed me if I can walk across a country, I can walk onto a stage, I can walk into a boardroom, I can walk towards my dreams. And that was what shifted things. It started giving me courage. That physical achievement gave me courage to kind of take on psychological achievements.
Mm, yeah, I definitely get that. And you mentioned also writing that song once you've experienced the sad passing of your dad. Was that the inspiration for writing that poem that then became a song?
When my father passed away, I'd been writing for a while, but I did write a song the day after he passed away called Forever in Me. And it was one of my favorite songs to sing. It really was an acknowledgement of how he lived his life and what an inspiration he was. And that the biggest compliment I ever got is if people told me I had his eyes. And I think it was also that going, I want to live into the person he saw I was capable of being.
Mm. And do you think that, writing music and expressing yourself in that way was kind of this outlet to perhaps deal with, the suffering and the loss?
Very much so. I mean, I think any songwriter out there will say that songs do become a therapy in their own way. And falling in love, falling out of love, self-doubt, losing a parent, all of that just gave me so much to write about. I mean, I wrote hundreds of songs. They just kept coming.
Mm. And for an individual that, suffers loss, I don't think that we have enough support or enough, things in place to support individuals who go through loss, especially if that loss happens to be sudden or that individual happens
Yeah.
to be someone at a young age, not having the proper support or structure around them to deal with that loss. What advice do you have for that individual, a young person who suffers loss suddenly?
I think what I've learned, because I've lost both of my parents now, and I've really seen that grief is its own journey, and there is no one way to walk through grief and loss. And sometimes giving yourself permission to walk through that grief and that loss in the way that's working for you rather than judging it or thinking this should be faster, or why am I getting over this too quickly, or why is it taking so long, is to trust the process, but also to have some people in your corner who you can talk about it with. I think not talking about it makes it last longer. So I found that talking it through with people that I loved, remembering him, happy memories, that helped me navigate it, and then doing something in someone's memory. So for me, the Camino, I did a second one when my mom died. It really was my way to cement their memories, to acknowledge them, celebrate them, and do something for myself. So I would always say, once you've sat with the grief, then go do something that allows you to express it however you need to in the world.
Mm, definitely. I think that also a challenge can be that um, the awareness around what they're feeling and not being able to express that. Like you said, talk about it. Most people don't know how to speak about it. Things that we perhaps take for granted, especially in communities that we're not taught how to process our emotions, and therefore everything gets bottled up and suppressed, and that leads to um, addictions. It leads to
Yeah.
suppression mechanisms. Your background in psychology, what did you learn about how to effectively process your emotions?
I have to honestly say, if I think back to an undergrad in psychology, all they were teaching you about is what makes us unwell. And I think if I'd continued, I was invited to do honors, but by then I was trying to be a pop star. Maybe then I would have learned how do you heal. But the first 3 years, you're just learning what makes you sick, what makes you unwell. It was only years later that I stumbled onto positive psychology, which didn't exist when I was at university. The actual field only came to be the year after I graduated. But that is where they give you positive ways to deal with how you're feeling. So even exercise as a way to go and move, because when you move, you change your emotions. Motion changes emotions. So exercise, kindness, going and helping someone else when you're struggling helps shift those negative emotions. Being grateful, being mindful. So those are the things I've learned later in life that help. But sometimes just sitting and let that rage or that hurt, just sit and feel it. Like, where is it in my body? Let me just make it bigger. Is it trying to tell me something? And as weird as that sounds, often wisdom will bubble out of those emotions because they're all there as guidance systems to show you, you're off track, you're on track. So I think the trick is to not judge them. And often we're taught socially like that's a bad emotion, don't feel that. It's the behavior that comes from the emotion that's going to be the problem. You can feel however you feel. It's if you act on it that it becomes an issue. So learning to feel it, I didn't learn that in my psychology degree. It kind of came later.
What things do you do to, in your personal life to process whatever you may be feeling? Is it all those things that you mentioned, or do you have certain practices on a daily basis?
I try to practice gratitude on a daily basis to remind myself to look around my environment, go, what's working? How lucky am I? Because our brains are designed to look for what's not working. It's how you survive. And so you actually have to actively make positive thinking or positive awareness a habit. So I try to do that. And when big emotions come up, I actually do allow them. And because I work for myself and I'm an entrepreneur, the minute I've got a gap, I'll say, you know what, I'm just going to go lie down and I'm just going to feel this. I'm not going to push through because I'm not bringing my best self. I will sometimes go for a massage if I've got time for that. I find having someone working on my body helps me to shift. But I've learned to acknowledge that my emotions are like the weather and they're not here forever, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But if I feel them fully, they often pass quicker.
That's a really good point. I'm not sure who said this, but the quote was, "Nothing is permanent."
Yeah.
And the idea behind that is, this too shall pass. Whatever
Yeah.
you're feeling, whatever you're going through, this too shall pass. I want to go back into your early career, and you wrote that song, and you essentially crowdfunded your album. Before it was a thing. What gave you that belief, that kind of encouragement to just go for it? Without a background in how to do that. There was no social media, there was no personal brand building. Walk me through your thought process back then.
So this was back in 2005. It's kind of 20 years ago. I'd been performing professionally for 2 years at that point, and I realized that if I wanted to take my music to the next level, I needed an album. The quote I had was 300,000 Rand to record, which I didn't have that money. South African music really was not selling well, especially white English girls from Cape Town. Like we were not topping the charts. And so I got stuck. And I think this happens to a lot of people in business. You go, oh, I don't have the money. And that obstacle just stops us. Like it's really hard to figure out how do I move past this. So I got stuck there from 2004 to 2005. We're talking a year to a year and a half. I got stuck in moaning. It's hard. No one understands. The industry's unfair. And people can just nod if they go, oh, yeah, that is how we talk about our businesses. It's very easy because you're not wrong. It is hard. But eventually I thought, you know what? I either need to just give up and walk away from this because I can't keep complaining, or I need to get creative. I need to find a way past this financial barrier. And what I did was, again, community, my sister, family, Kay and I went to have a cup of coffee in Simonstown in Cape Town to talk about, how do I do this? How do I find the 300,000 Rand I don't have and record my album? And she actually had just been reading a book called The Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono. And I highly recommend this to anyone who's an entrepreneur, who's a business owner, who wants to be able to think creatively, strategically, differently. Because Kay didn't even have the book with her. These tools are so simple that once you understand them, you don't even need the book to do them. But the concept is, we've all heard of, you put your thinking hat on. We've all heard of that, but no one ever gave us the hat. And in this book, he actually tells you there's 6 hats. There's 6 directions of thinking. And when you're trying to solve a problem, you want to think about all the aspects. You want to think about the facts, which is white hat. You want to think about the emotions that are maybe clouding your judgment. That's what he calls the red hat. You want to think about what's working. So yellow hat, sunshine, what's actually going right, which is not natural for a lot of people. Black hat, what's not working. That's easy. And then green hat, what are the out the box ideas that I could solve my concerns with? And the hat that kind of helps you do the thinking he calls blue hat. So it's kind of blue sky, it's the focus, and make sure you're asking the right question. And so over that coffee, we asked this question: how do I record an album without going into debt? So we actually put my problem into the question. So it gave my brain a bit of a stretch. And then we just looked at my career. We looked at the facts that my songs were written. I had a band, I had a website, didn't have the money. We looked at the fact that I was feeling very overwhelmed, frustrated, anxious, which is natural when you're not getting where you want to. But the thing that started to change it for me was when Kay said, put on your yellow hat and go, what's working? Because I hadn't looked at that. And I was like, oh, I have 200 songs. I have a band. I have a website. There's not as much competition in South Africa. And just that aspect of looking at what was working meant that when I put on my black hat and went, I don't have the money. If I borrow the money, I'll be in debt. All the negatives, they weren't as overwhelming. And that is what freed me up to get to the creative thinking, the green hat, and go, if anything was possible, how could I record an album without going into debt? And I suddenly looked at what was working in my business, which was the songs were written. I had a website. I had very supportive fans. And I said, imagine if I asked them all to buy copies of my album before I recorded it. And it was a crazy idea, but why it grew was that Kay was an amazing thinking partner. And this is really important for anyone who's thinking. You need someone who's going to say yes. Oh, how could that work? What would you do? And that's what she did. She was like, yes, that's crazy. How would you do it? What else could you do? And we kept building the idea. And finally, we had this concept. We're going to sell an album that doesn't exist. People will replace a label. They'll build it with me, and we'd give 10% to charity. That whole process took us 30 minutes. 30
Amazing.
minutes. Yeah. I'd been stuck for nearly 2 years. 30
Hmm.
minutes of kind of unpacking the problem using this framework. And that's why I say people must just go buy the book. It was revolutionary. And so I was so excited to see if it could be done, because I come from a pioneering family. So I was like, hell, I want to see if this can be done. So I just started. And I didn't know, none of us knew what I was doing was called crowdfunding. And we
Hmm.
didn't know that I would eventually sell 2,000 copies of nothing in 25 countries, give 30,000 Rand to charity. And the funny part was, what the project did was, it did not make me famous for singing. It made me famous for thinking. So that's when my life changed. I went from being a singer to being a speaker to being a facilitator, which wasn't the plan, but I think life had a bigger plan.
And a lot of individuals have that big dream, and all you could say dreamers and not doers. Do you think that that's because they focus too much on what's going wrong as opposed to, wearing the 6 hats and
Yeah.
exploring their options?
Absolutely. I think there's two things that stop us from doing. The one is we're focused on all the things that could go wrong and we're afraid of failure. And the second is going, I'm not going to do it till it's perfect. But if you need to innovate, you have to fail forward and fail forward fast. And that's what I did. I just started. I told people about the idea, and everyone who was in the music industry said that will not work because that's not how music is funded. It's 2005. And everyone who wasn't in the industry said, "Why not? We love it. It's crazy. Let's help you do it." And they designed me posters. I had a digital agency come on board to do the e-commerce platform, and funnily enough, the two incredible brains behind that e-commerce platform, Andrew and Shane, went on to start a small little company called Yappy Chef. I was their project that they worked on first, and then they went on to do great things. But I really discovered, and I think this is true for all entrepreneurs, is that your word creates your world. The way you speak about your vision, about your idea, your product, the impact you wanted to make, the difference you wanted to create, that's what determines who shows up to help you get there. And so when you really speak from that place of passion and conviction and you show people that you're persevering, people come to help you get up that mountain because it's not easy. And there were many times I wanted to fall over, but often I would stop and go, let me look back, put on my yellow hat, and appreciate everything that's worked so far. Let that re energize me and then start dealing with the obstacles.
Definitely. And that vision can be overwhelming. And having this big grand idea of where you want to be in the next 5, 10 years. Some individuals are brilliant in actually picturing what that looks like. But how do you deal, and how do individuals deal with not becoming overwhelmed by that big grand vision and actually just taking it one day at a time?
That is challenging. I had a much bigger vision than what actually happened. I wanted to sell 10 million copies. I wanted to be interviewed on Oprah. I wanted my album to top the charts. And that did not happen. And I often joke when I'm teaching or doing talks or going, you all know I'm not a famous pop star, So I had to accept that exactly what I envisaged is not exactly what materialized. But what materialized was actually a new path, a new direction. But what I do now as a global speaker and facilitator and coach would not have happened if I hadn't tried in the music industry. So I think the trick again is have the big vision. Go, that's the horizon I'm moving to, but I'm not there. So right here I am. I'm just going to take the first step and the first step. And then something might happen here that goes, oh, I'm actually now going in a new direction. And I think for all of us, the biggest challenge of that is to go, do I have the grace to accept what's flowing in my life rather than to spend my life kind of pushing upstream? Because the music industry for me was a paddling upstream experience. I was trying to make it work and it wasn't. And when speaking started happening, which I wasn't trying to make work and it was flowing, I actually resisted it. So I'm like, but I'm meant to be a singer. And so
Mm.
it took me a year or two to have the grace to go, I think life is wanting this for me. And the singing was just a doorway. It was just opening a door to move you forward. So I'm not sure if that helps anyone, but I think if we can let go of our idea of exactly what life has planned for us and let life show us, it's a much easier journey.
Mhm. I think something that I struggle with is differentiating between what is swimming upstream and what is actually an obstacle that's meant to help
Yeah.
me grow and learn from. So,
Yeah.
how would you differentiate between swimming upstream and what's an obstacle that you're meant to learn from?
So I do think it comes down to you're never going to not work hard in the direction of what you need to do. And sometimes those obstacles are incredible opportunities, which recording the album was one of those for me. Life gave me an obstacle. It showed me that I was being stopped by the idea that you need to have the money to do something. And when I found a way around it, I put all my energy into crowdfunding the album. When I actually released it, I realized I hadn't ever thought about what you did with an actual album. So it was like, dear, I didn't think about the next step. I was so busy crowdfunding. But I think it's more an experience of and I was a river guide my first year out of school. So maybe that's why we're going with paddling upstream. If you are doing a river trip, you're not going to not paddle, but you will know the difference between I'm making progress versus I'm stuck in an eddy and something needs to shift. So it's just always going, can I course correct? Or can I go, where are the areas in my business that seem to be easier, that are flowing faster? And should I maybe put attention there? And that's what I would say, because even as a facilitator, I've got 3 or 4 offerings for clients, and I was trying to sell all of them. And eventually I was like, actually, people want to learn how to present from me because of the speaking, and it's much easier for me to focus on that. And if my other courses get someone asks, no problem. But I stopped pouring my energy into them, and I chose the current that was flowing the best in my business.
And could you also walk me through your public speaking journey and what excites you about it? Do you feel that it's a place where you really feel like you're in flow when you're up on stage and speaking to individuals or coaching individuals on public speaking?
So my speaking journey, it started back in 2007 around the album, and I realized I loved sharing with people what I was learning about innovation, and it really was something that flowed. And I think it was because I was living the experience of my projects, and I passionately wanted to show people that they could also think differently in their businesses and the problems they faced. And then in 2011, I joined Toastmasters International just as a way to build my speaking skills. It's an international organization that helps people improve their communication and leadership. And it really was just something for fun, to be honest. I enjoyed it. I loved learning to give feedback. I enjoyed mentoring speakers. So that's where I discovered that I enjoyed the element of coaching and helping other people find their voice and express their ideas and communicate powerfully. In 2012, our club, we had a little club in Fishhook in Cape Town. They said, we're having a speaking contest. I said, no problem, I'll enter. And I was a little bit arrogant. I thought, I'm a professional speaker, I'll probably win this. My sister Kay, who was also a member and a very nervous speaker, also entered, but with a far less arrogant attitude. So she actually worked on her speech. And on the night of the contest, she beat me. And that was an affront for my ego. And I then watched her, because only then did I discover that we'd entered an international speaking contest with 35,000 contestants in 149 countries. And Kay just kept winning, and she won Southern Africa. Then she went to the world semifinals, and she came second in her semifinal. And the man who beat her 2 days later became the world champion of public speaking. And so watching her journey was humbling. It was inspiring, but it was also intimidating. I saw how hard it was to do competitive speaking. And so I just decided to stay back, mentor people that were competing. I was like, no, I don't want to do that again. 2015, I thought, let me try again. And I had a speech I was excited by. And I managed to make it to the Western Cape level, where I came third. And at that point, I developed a bit of a fixed mindset of like, why bother? This doesn't work for me. I'm a professional speaker. How embarrassing. I can't win a Toastmasters contest. It was not the nicest version of myself. And I left it. I didn't compete for six years. In fact, I left Toastmasters to become a mom in 2019. And then lockdown hit in 2020. And I was at home on maternity leave, and actually rejoining virtually gave me community in that very tough time. And it was in 2020, they had a virtual world championship, and I watched it, and something lit up in me. And I thought, you know what? I want to enter this contest again. I want to do it properly. I want to work like my sister Kay had worked. And I want to see if someone from Africa could actually win this. And I want to see if only 5 women in 80 years had ever won it. So I thought, I'm going to give it everything. Entered in 2021, and against the odds, got through to the world semifinals, and one of the first times that someone from South Africa had made it. to the world semifinals, because they now do a knockout round between you winning in your country and getting to the semifinals. And I made it to the top 8 in the world, only woman left standing, only speaker from Africa, and was incredibly blessed to bring home the title of World Champion of Public Speaking to Africa for the first time. It changed my life. It just catapulted me onto a global stage. But the thing that I really wanted to happen from me winning was that it would break the ceiling for Africa. And the very next year, our 2022 world champion, Cyril Jr. Dim, is from Zimbabwe, my home country. So it's been life-changing. And it's through that that I really work to help people improve their communication and presenting skills.
So you spoke about a fixed mindset.
Mm.
Did you have to then establish this growth mindset? And was that the key for you to then realize that you can practice and you can work on things to become the best and to actually win that competition?
100%. So for me, the mindset, and we call it fixed or growth. I like to now call it a champion mindset. That the reasons I wasn't winning when I first competed was I really wasn't prepared to put in the effort, the time. I wasn't asking for feedback. I actually found it very uncomfortable receiving feedback. I was intimidated by people like my sister who'd beaten me before. Instead of looking to them for lessons and inspiration, I was rejecting their success. And I was avoiding the challenges and obstacles that go with competing. And I stayed there for nearly 10 years in Toastmasters. So I think it's important people know that. It's very easy to see someone and maybe see some trophies and go, oh, that was easy for you. It was like, no, I had to find the ability. And I always like to think of a growth mindset like an open hand, going, this is challenging. I'm going to do this in lockdown on Zoom. I'm going to figure that out. I'm going to learn. I'm going to reach out for coaching. I visited 42 clubs in 16 countries, and I received feedback from more than 200 people about my speeches. That is not easy, but I knew that if I wanted to win, I was going to have to hear what wasn't working. I was going to have to change. I was going to have to be agile, flexible, adaptable, work with my coach, take on. I had a world champion, a former world champion working with me, and watch every other world champion, learn from their success. And so that is the power of that growth mindset. Instead of being intimidated and holding myself back, I was just curious and open. And I mean, I was working 3 to 4 hours a day on 2 7-minute speeches. It was intense, but I knew that if I wanted to get the results, and that again, that wasn't a paddling upstream experience. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was like being in the Grand Canyon, strapped in, like oars going, knowing that I was on the right track because I had this bizarre feeling that I was going to win. And so I just listened to it and I gave it everything. And the result shows that that is the mindset that makes the difference. This one, you stay very safe, but you achieve nothing.
How did you become okay with receiving feedback?
It was tough. The first time I had a coaching session with a world champion was 10 days before the Southern African finals. And he's my all-time favorite world champion, Lance Miller. So it was a huge honor to have him coaching me. And for the first half an hour, while he was telling me everything that I could change about my speech, I didn't write down one note. I sat there, and it was amazing what the ego does. It's going, he won in 2005. He doesn't really know what it's like now. No, I don't think he understands. He's American. I mean, it was radical. And at some point, I like to think that this is ego, like your fixed mindset is your ego and your growth mindset is your soul. My soul was like, Verity, you're paying a world champion to coach you. Take some bloody notes. And I rewrote the speech after our call, and that was the speech that won me Southern Africa and was good enough to get me into the top 28. So it was such a pivotal moment of going, I don't know everything. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to change. And that's when I started embracing feedback.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's an important lesson. And I loved how you describe the fixed mindset and the growth mindset of the ego and the soul. I think that here there's so much a possibility,
Mm.
and you can essentially achieve everything that you want to if you just
Yeah.
have this mentality about things. Another question I have is around, being an effective public speaker. So in terms of key traits, what would you say are some of these characteristics that this individual needs to have to become this effective public speaker?
Oh, great question. So, being an effective public speaker is not contingent on you being an extrovert or overly confident. It's contingent on you being authentic and you being passionate about what you're talking about. It also comes down to how you share your ideas and can people see what you're saying. But I think it's really important that it is that you bring you to the conversation, to the stage, to the screen, wherever you are speaking. And I'll share with you the kind of three things that my coach, Lance Miller, says impact an audience when you speak. Only 20% of what they're going to remember of your presentation is the mechanics, the way you've written it, structured it, your slides. That only impacts them by about 20%. 30% of the impact they feel is your message. What is your why? What is your purpose? That's what they're going to repeat. That's what they're going to be talking about. 50% of what impacts an audience when you're speaking is your life force, your energy, your conviction, your passion. That's what they resonate with. And that's why we often see, and I can use politicians as an example, politicians with high life force, even if the message and the mechanics are off par, they'll still get the votes because we are moved by people's energy. And even a quiet, introverted person speaking from a place of passion can have that impact. So, effective communication is clarity on your message. What is this thing I stand for, and why does it matter? And coming from that place of conviction. My job as a coach is then to help people with the mechanics because good mechanics give you confidence. But really, it is about bringing you and learning to ensure that your message is landing.
That's quite insightful because essentially it's 80% is the individual and
Yeah.
20% mechanics, which
Yeah.
is amazing. And I also heard you speak about the three C's in effectively delivering a speech. Could you quickly walk us through the three C's?
The three C's. Absolutely. You've been doing your homework. So, to kind of explain what the three C's are, I realized after I won the world championships and I was reflecting on what I'd learned about great presentations, the word presentation suddenly jumped out at me. And I was like, oh, wow, it's got present in it. And to present means to give. And I realized that a great speech is a gift that you give to your audience. Because if they don't take home what you've said, why did you give it? It's like if they just leave it and walk out, you need not have bothered. Now, what happens with a great gift is why someone is excited when they receive a gift is often in the way it's presented. If it's been wrapped with care and there's a beautiful bow, there's often a heightened sense of curiosity and like, oh, thank you, you've thought of me, I want to get inside. And so that is the first C you want to create in your audience: curiosity. And curiosity we can do literally from the subject line of an email when we're inviting someone to a pitch. You could make it interesting, the one thing that's going to revolutionize your business or whatever it is. They'll go, "Ooh, I want to come listen to that." So you want to create curiosity early and often when you're presenting. Even things like, you will not believe what the research uncovered, and a pause gets people curious. So curiosity is really important. With curiosity, however, you want to create connection. If people can see themselves in your story, they're going to see themselves in your solution. And so it's so important that if you're talking about a business or an offering, can you create a scenario or a story that people can see themselves in? Even if they haven't lived it, but if you're explaining a scenario of getting stuck in the traffic or trying to get a kid to school on time, even if they don't have children, they'll remember when they were a kid going, oh, yeah, that was frustrating. And then you reveal how maybe your offering helps to solve that or that you've got a way to deal with that. They're going to be like, oh, wow, I like that. I feel connected to it. So you want them to see themselves in your story so that they will see themselves in your solution. So create curiosity early and often, create connection points with universal experiences of wanting more money, overcoming problems, dealing with frustrations, whatever it is. If you do those 2 C's, you will often get the third C that we're always looking for, which is commitment, buy-in, the yes. The mistake a lot of people make when they're communicating, and especially in business, is we ask for the commitment too early. We come in making the sale hot and hard, and that's like going on a first date and proposing. Like you just wouldn't do it. You would first get the person curious about you. You'd find common connection points, and only later would commitment come. So, in communication, keep them curious, let them feel connected to what you're saying. Your call to action, that commitment would only come right at the end of a pitch. Don't start too early with asking for buy in.
You're amazing. Do you ever get nervous?
Oh, yes. Yes. I think if you stop getting nervous, you've stopped caring. So, I don't feel nerves like other people might feel when they're presenting. But even the day before a big keynote, I'll notice I'm just a little bit on edge. Is everything in place? Let me check my slides. And it's like a positive apprehension and nerves.
And for someone that, suffers with experiencing nerves or even anxiety, how does this person overcome that when perhaps, it doesn't even have to be speaking on stage. It could be, presenting their presentation to their colleagues at work.
Yeah. So there's some practical things you can do, and there's some physical things you can do. So, number one, practice your presentation. Putting your PowerPoint slide together is not practicing your presentation. So, because people they like spend all their time on the slides, which is the mechanics, and then they say it out loud for the first time in the boardroom, and there's nerves and they're feeling thrown. So, practice your presentation. I do suggest to people, film yourself, watch yourself. It can be very uncomfortable, but if you don't want to watch your video, why should the audience watch you? Watch yourself, see how you're coming across, and then watch yourself with the sound switched off. If it's not interesting with the sound switched off, it's not going to be interesting with it switched on. That's how you see if there's life force coming through. So practice. The other thing that really helps is, if it's possible, get there early. Get comfortable in the space you're going to present in. See where you're going to stand in the boardroom or on the stage. Check the links are working. Check your slides. Those little bits of preparation help with nerves. They really, really do. But then physically, because the nerves are real, the heart's pounding, the stomach's churning, the hands are sweating, mouth is dry. It's like your whole body kind of rejects you, leaves you in your moment of need. Is the one way to deal with that is with your breath. So you want to breathe out more than you breathe in. So what I do with clients is we learn to do nasal breathing. So in for 4, hold for 4, and then out your mouth for 8. If you do that 3 or 4 times, you'll notice that it slows your heart rate down. When your heart rate speeds up, I believe your brain slows down. So your main thing you want to work on is slowing your heart rate so that your brain and all the work you've done can actually come across. But if the breathing's not enough, then the second trick I say to people is to practice what we call power poses. There's an amazing TED talk by Amy Cuddy that people can check out. But I literally have people like Superman, Wonder Woman, whatever it is. But if you stand like this and open up and breathe and do that for 5 minutes, and you can't always do it in a boardroom, but then uncross your legs, sit back, small smile, thank yourself for the work you've done, see it at the end of the presentation that you've done well. Those little things, and a lot of clients will come back to me saying, I did it. It really helped. So work with your body, but also set yourself up for success with preparation.
I think that's so vital and such an important point that you made, the preparation. Have you ever heard of the 5 Ps?
Yes, but you're going to have to remind me. Yeah.
Yes. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. The five
Yes.
Ps. And I think that, that's like you said, it's such a simple change, but just having that, um, I guess, that linking the mental and that physical change can already help by just sitting up straight, breathing
Mm.
longer. I think that these small changes can make a big difference. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Verity, in this last part of the podcast, I want to, maybe it's called the fast fire. So maybe if you could answer in a word or a short sentence,
Perfect.
that would be perfect.
Done.
What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Gosh. You got me stumped. Best piece of advice I've ever received. Work on an attitude of gratitude.
That's good. And the worst piece of advice?
Advice. So I'm trying to think. Someone told me to give up in the contest and not bother. I wasn't good enough. And I never got hold of them to see what they thought when I won.
If you saw that person now, what would you say?
I don't know. I might say thank you. You fueled me to prove you wrong.
That's very mature. Your advice to someone who, we spoke about this earlier, but who has that big dream, but just doesn't have the clarity on what their next move is. What's your advice to that person?
Think with someone. Sit down and brainstorm, buy the six hats, see where it takes your thinking.
Amazing. Next steps. What's in the pipeline? Personal, professional career.
For me, I've been working on a second book called Think Ahead of the Crowd, which is about my crowdfunding, but I never have the time between work. So I do want to get that finished in the next year or so. I'll put it out there as a commitment. And just to continue supporting speakers and organizations to improve the way they present. It is my absolute passion. So I'm loving just being in this river and letting it take me where it takes me. I don't need to define it currently. I'm Personally, I'm a mom, so that also needs a lot of time.
Amazing. Thank you. Verity, this was very insightful. Thank you for your time and all your valuable insights and wise words on not just public speaking, but you gave us a lot on, how can you as an individual who essentially comes from a very humble background make something of your life and actually go after the thing that you want. So thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.